Don't talk. Maid's daughter caught something shocking. She just saved billionaire CEO's life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into this incredible story. In the heart of the city, inside the tallest skyscraper, sat one of the wealthiest men in the world, billionaire Samuel McCarthy. A man who could buy anything with the snap of his fingers, yet today, he would be unknowingly on the verge of losing his life. Samuel had invited a select group of elite guests to his private penthouse for a special dinner, a lavish event that only a handful of people in the world could attend. The table was covered in gold and silverware, fine china, and crystal glassware that shimmered under the dim, ambient lighting. The air was filled with the subtle scent of expensive perfume and the sharp tang of freshly prepared gourmet dishes. It was a scene of opulence. But amidst this grandeur, there was someone who didn't belong here. A young girl, no older than 11, sat quietly in the corner, trying her best to remain invisible. Her name was Lily, and she was the daughter of the housekeeper. She wasn't supposed to be seen, let alone noticed, by anyone in this luxurious setting. She had been told by her mother, Abigail, to stay out of sight and avoid drawing attention to herself. And so, Lily did exactly that. But that night, something was about to change. As the guests chatted about their latest business deals and extravagant vacations, Lily's sharp eyes caught something unusual. The food being served to Samuel McCarthy, the billionaire himself, was placed on a pristine, silver plate. It looked delicious, plump lobster, delicate caviar, and a perfectly seared steak. But something about the plate caught Lily's attention. Her gaze flicked to the waiter's hands as they placed the dish down, and she noticed a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer near the edges of the plate. A hint of something off. Her heart skipped a beat. Lily wasn't sure what she was seeing, but it didn't feel right. As she stared, her instincts kicked in. She had seen something like this before. It was the subtle sheen of a substance, something toxic. A small, almost invisible layer of poison had been applied to the food, designed to be undetectable to most people. Her stomach churned. She didn't know who was behind it, but she knew that Samuel McCarthy was in grave danger. Without a second thought, Lily stood up and walked over to the table. Her movements were calm, almost deliberate, as she approached the billionaire. She had no idea how she would explain what she had seen, but she knew she had to act. The room fell silent as Lily spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't talk," she said, looking directly at Samuel McCarthy. The billionaire's eyes widened in confusion as the room fell into an uncomfortable stillness. He was used to people addressing him, but never like this. He furrowed his brow, clearly irritated, but before he could respond, Lily pointed at the plate in front of him. "You shouldn't eat that," she continued, her voice steady. The guests at the table exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what to make of the young girl's sudden interruption. Samuel glanced at her, his face flushed with confusion and annoyance. "What are you talking about?" he snapped. But Lily didn't back down. "There's poison on your food," she said, her words cutting through the tension in the room. The entire room fell silent, the gravity of her words sinking in. Samuel McCarthy stared at the plate in front of him, his jaw tightening as he looked at the little girl who had just saved his life. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and almost suffocating. The guests at the table were still silent, their eyes darting between Samuel McCarthy and Lily, the young girl who had just interrupted their luxurious dinner. For a brief moment, the billionaire CEO seemed frozen in disbelief. His hand hovered above the plate, unsure whether to continue with his meal or to listen to the strange warning from a child who clearly didn't belong in this room. But Lily didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her small figure barely noticeable in the grand room, yet the weight of her words was undeniable. Samuel glanced around, searching the faces of the guests, expecting to find someone who could explain why this little girl was talking like she knew something he didn't. His gaze was met with nothing but confusion and disbelief. "What did you say?" Samuel asked again, this time with a hint of unease creeping into his voice. He had spent his entire life in control, surrounded by yes-men and people who respected his power. But here was a child, a mere housekeeper's daughter, telling him that his food was poisoned. Lily's heart was racing, but she kept her voice steady as she spoke once more. "You shouldn't eat that. It's poisoned." The words hung in the air, shocking everyone in the room. The atmosphere was no longer one of wealth and elegance. It was filled with tension and confusion. Samuel stared at Lily for a long moment, as though trying to figure out if she was playing some cruel joke on him. But then something in his gut twisted. It wasn't the first time he had heard of people trying to harm him, and deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this girl might actually be telling the truth. He glanced down at his plate, the lobster, the caviar, the perfectly cooked steak. All of it seemed to glisten under the dim light. It looked perfect, too perfect. And that's when he remembered a conversation he had overheard earlier in the day, one that had been casually mentioned by a business partner who had a reputation for being ruthless. The thought made his skin crawl. Could this child, this maid's daughter, actually know something? His mind raced. The guests in the room exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do. Some were starting to whisper, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Samuel McCarthy, a man who had built his fortune on outsmarting others, suddenly felt small, uncertain, and vulnerable. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't in control. He looked up at Lily, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do you know?" Lily didn't hesitate. "I saw it. The person who served your food touched it. I know what poison looks like." The room fell into a stunned silence. The reality of the situation was sinking in. This wasn't just a little girl making wild claims. There was something about her calm demeanor, the certainty in her voice, that made Samuel believe her. The billionaire stood up. Slowly, his legs shaking slightly beneath him. His mind was spinning, but he knew one thing for sure. He had to get that food away from him. He turned to the head waiter, his voice stern but shaking. "Take it away. Now." The waiter, equally confused but loyal, quickly grabbed the plate and whisked it away. The room was still, the sound of hushed breaths filling the silence. Samuel felt his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to process what had just happened. He looked back at Lily, his face a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Lily just nodded, her small frame looking almost fragile in the grand dining room. But her eyes were full of something far stronger, courage. The billionaire's mind was still racing, but in that moment, he realized something. It wasn't just his life that had been saved. The course of everything he had built was now irrevocably changed. And all of it was thanks to a little girl who had been invisible to everyone else in the room. Samuel McCarthy stood frozen for a moment, still processing what had just happened. The shock of Lily's words, the fact that a mere child had just saved his life, was starting to settle in. He felt his legs give way slightly, his body almost betraying him as he struggled to maintain his composure. This wasn't just about a dangerous dinner. It was about trust, betrayal, and something far darker lurking just beneath the surface. As the head waiter quickly whisked away the poisoned dish, the guests remained eerily silent, their eyes wide, some in disbelief, others in awe. But Samuel's gaze never left Lily. The room was full of the city's most powerful people, people who, like him, were used to control, to wealth, to power. And yet here was this young girl, a maid's daughter, who had just defied everything they thought they knew. Samuel cleared his throat, trying to shake off the tremor in his voice. "Who would do such a thing?" he finally asked, his voice shaky but sharp. Lily didn't look intimidated. She simply met his gaze and spoke quietly, yet with certainty. "Someone who wants you out of the picture." Samuel frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. He hadn't thought about it that way. He was too used to thinking of threats as things he could handle with money or influence. But this felt different. This was personal, and it made him feel small. "But why me?" Samuel asked. "Why now?" Lily hesitated for a brief moment before replying. "Because you're in the way." The bluntness of her answer left him speechless. In the silence that followed, Samuel began to think back to everything he had been involved in over the past few weeks. Business deals, acquisitions, people he had crossed paths with, deals that had gone sour, and threats that had seemed like nothing more than empty talk. But now, all those little signs, those subtle threats, started to make sense. Someone had decided that he was no longer needed, and they had gone to extreme lengths to make sure he didn't get in their way. He glanced down at Lily, still trying to process everything. How could this little girl know so much? How could she have seen what no one else had? His thoughts were interrupted as Lily spoke again, her voice a little softer but still filled with that same quiet strength. You should be careful, she said. There's more going on than you know. The way she said it made Samuel feel a chill run down his spine. He had been running his empire for decades, and yet here was a child telling him to be careful, telling him there was something he didn't know. His mind was racing, his heart beating a little faster as he considered what to do next. Who else knows about this? Samuel asked, his voice low. Lily shook her head. No one. Not yet. She hesitated before adding. But you need to be careful who you trust. Samuel stared at her, her words echoing in his mind. The warning wasn't just about the dinner. It was about something much bigger, something lurking in the shadows. As he looked around the room at the people who had been dining with him, he realized that he no longer knew who to trust. The thought made his stomach turn. He had built everything he had on the foundation of power, control, and loyalty. But now, he wasn't sure where that foundation stood. As the room began to return to a semblance of normality, with guests whispering among themselves and trying to process what had just happened, Samuel turned back to Lily. He could see that she was still standing quietly, her eyes filled with determination and an understanding far beyond her years. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You've saved my life tonight. I don't know how to repay you. Lily smiled softly, shaking her head. You don't have to, she replied simply. But Samuel could see the wisdom in her eyes. She had done something tonight that most people could never do. She had saved a life, not with money or power, but with pure instinct, courage, and a quiet strength that most of the people in this room would never understand. And as the night wore on, Samuel knew that his life, his empire, was about to change. All thanks to a little girl who had been invisible to everyone else, but who had seen the truth when no one else could. The tension in the room was palpable. The guests, once chatting casually, were now silenced by what had just happened. Samuel McCarthy, still shaken from the events of the evening, couldn't shake the thought that something much bigger than a poisoned meal was at play. As the evening progressed, he found himself unable to focus on anything other than Lily's words. Be careful who you trust. They echoed in his mind, growing louder with each passing moment. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He had built his empire on trust. Trust in his business partners, his advisors, and his team. But now, he realized that trust could be the very thing that brought it all crashing down. After dismissing the guests for the evening, Samuel ordered Lily to come with him to his private study. He needed answers, and she was the only one who seemed to know more than she was letting on. As they entered the room, the air was thick with unspoken words. Samuel closed the door behind them and turned to her. You were right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There's something happening. I can feel it, but I don't know who to trust anymore. Lily stood silently, her gaze steady as she looked up at him. Her young face, usually so serene, now carried a weight of understanding that seemed far beyond her years. I know, she said quietly. I've seen it before. People like you, they think they can control everything, but they don't see what's hiding in the shadows. Samuel's heart raced. You're not just talking about me, are you? He asked. You're talking about everyone. The people I work with. Lily nodded slowly. Yes, the people you trust the most could be the ones who want to see you fall. Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. He had always prided himself on being able to read people, to see through their facades. But now, for the first time in his life, he wondered if he had missed something huge. I don't understand, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Who would want to hurt me? Lily stepped forward, her small frame appearing even more fragile in the dim light. The truth is, Mr. McCarthy, you've made a lot of enemies along the way. People who've lost everything because of you. People who are willing to do anything to bring you down. The room fell silent as Samuel absorbed her words. He had always been aware of competitors, rivals, and those who resented his success, but he never imagined that someone close to him could be plotting his downfall. He had always believed that money could solve every problem, that influence could buy loyalty. But now, in the cold stillness of the study, he felt the weight of his own vulnerability. What do I do now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her. You start by looking at the people around you. You start by asking yourself who benefits from your downfall. And then you watch closely. Trust no one. The words hit Samuel like a punch to the gut. He had built his entire life on trusting the right people, on creating connections that would ensure his success. But now, all that he had worked for seemed to be unraveling before his eyes. He couldn't help but wonder if this was all part of some larger game that he didn't even know he was playing. As he looked at Lily, he realized that her quiet strength had just saved his life. Again, thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You've done more for me tonight than anyone else ever has. Lily gave him a small smile, the kind of smile that spoke of quiet wisdom and strength beyond her years. You're welcome, Mr. McCarthy. But you still have a lot to learn. Samuel nodded slowly, his mind racing with the weight of what she had said. He knew that his life and his empire were at a crossroads. He could no longer trust everything he had built, and the only thing left was to start over, to rebuild from the ground up. But now, with Lily's help, he had a new understanding of the world he had created. And with that understanding came a renewed sense of determination. He would not let the shadows take what he had worked so hard to build. As the days passed, Samuel McCarthy found himself increasingly preoccupied with the events of that night. Lily's words kept echoing in his mind, especially the part about not trusting anyone. He had spent years building an empire, a fortress of wealth and power, but now it seemed fragile, vulnerable to forces he didn't fully understand. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the danger wasn't just from external rivals. It was from the people closest to him. His mind wandered back to his business partners, his trusted advisors, and the ones who had been by his side for years. Was one of them the one who had tried to kill him? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He had to find out who was behind it, but doing so would require him to question everything he had ever believed in. He could no longer afford to be the man who trusted without question. He had to be the man who saw through the lies, the manipulations. That's when he decided to take action. Samuel called a meeting with his closest advisors, a group of individuals who had been instrumental in his rise to power. They were some of the brightest minds in the industry, and he trusted them with his business and personal matters alike. But now, he knew he had to approach this meeting with a new perspective. As he entered the room, the familiar faces greeted him with smiles, their words polite, their body language reassuring. But Samuel wasn't fooled. He sat down at the head of the table, his gaze sweeping over the group. The tension in the air was palpable, though none of the advisors seemed to notice it. I need to know everything, Samuel said, his voice firm but calm. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Everything about the deals we've made, the people we've worked with, and most importantly, who benefits from my downfall. The room fell silent. It was as if Samuel had just dropped a bombshell. His advisors exchanged confused glances, unsure of how to respond. But Samuel wasn't done. Someone tried to kill me, he continued, his eyes narrowing as he stared at each of them. I want to know who. The silence deepened. A few of the advisors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke. Samuel's gaze settled on David Grant, his CFO, a man who had always seemed trustworthy, loyal even. David met his gaze with a calm expression, but there was something in his eyes that made Samuel pause. It was subtle, but it was there. A flicker of something. Was it guilt? Or fear? Samuel didn't know, but he knew it was time to start asking the hard questions. David, Samuel said, his voice cold. You've been with me from the beginning. I need you to tell me the truth. Who in this room would want me gone? David swallowed hard, his throat bobbing nervously. I don't know what you mean, Mr. McCarthy, he stammered, clearly uncomfortable. Samuel leaned forward, his eyes never leaving David's face. I think you do, he said quietly. The room held its breath, waiting for David to speak. But instead of answering, David's gaze shifted to Lily, who had quietly entered the room and was standing at the door, her presence unnoticed by everyone except Samuel. She had been watching the entire exchange, her expression unreadable. Samuel's heart skipped a beat as he realized that she had been right all along. The truth was right in front of him. Lily, Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you know? Lily stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. I know that the person who tried to kill you is someone you trust, she said simply. And it's someone in this room. Samuel's pulse quickened. The room seemed to close in on him, the weight of her words sinking in. He turned to face his advisors, his mind racing. Who could it be? And what did it mean for everything he had built? He had to find out, and fast. As the meeting continued, Samuel's thoughts were consumed with the growing realization that his empire wasn't just under attack from the outside. It was crumbling from within, and he was about to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The tension in the room was unbearable. Samuel McCarthy's mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle that had just been laid before him. The realization that the person who had tried to kill him was someone he trusted, and that Lily had known all along, was a blow he wasn't sure how to handle. His eyes flicked from Lily to the group of advisors in the room. The suspicion was growing, gnawing at him like a constant, insistent voice. Who could it be? Who in this room would want him dead? He had been surrounded by these people for years. He had relied on them for everything, from his business decisions to his personal affairs. But now, it felt like they were all suspects. David Grant, his CFO, was the first to break the silence. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he shifted in his seat. "Mr. McCarthy, I swear, I don't know what she's talking about," David said, his voice cracking. "I've been loyal to you. I've done everything to help you build this empire." Samuel's gaze remained fixed on him, unwavering. Loyalty? Is that what this is? Because it doesn't feel like loyalty when someone tries to kill you. David's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for words. But there was nothing he could say that would make the situation better. The truth was out, and Samuel could feel the weight of it settling on his shoulders. "Lily," Samuel said, his voice low, "what exactly do you know? Who is it?" Lily stepped forward, her small frame casting a shadow over the room. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp, filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. "The person who tried to kill you isn't just a random enemy," she said, her voice steady. "It's someone who has been by your side for years, someone who knows your every move, your every decision." The words sent a chill through Samuel. He had trusted these people with everything, and now it seemed like his trust had been betrayed in the most unimaginable way. "It's David," Lily said quietly, her gaze never leaving the CFO. David froze, his face draining of color. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice shaking with fear. But it was too late. Samuel could see the truth in Lily's eyes. He had known David for years, but the doubt now creeping into his mind was undeniable. "You're lying," David spat, his voice rising in anger. "You don't know what you're talking about. I've always been loyal to you, Samuel. Always." Samuel's heart was pounding. He had spent years building an empire, but now it was all coming apart in front of him. He had to know the truth. "Lily," Samuel said, turning his attention back to the young girl. "How do you know this?" Lily's eyes softened, but her expression remained unwavering. "I saw David," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He was the one who put the poison on your food. I saw him do it. He thought no one was watching, but I was." Samuel felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The man he had trusted most in his empire had tried to kill him. The betrayal was so deep, so complete, that it was hard to comprehend. But Lily's words were undeniable. Samuel turned back to David, his eyes cold with fury. "How could you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How could you betray me like this?" David's face twisted with rage. "You don't understand," he snarled. "You've changed. You've become weak. The company, the power, everything is slipping away, and I had to do something about it." Samuel's mind reeled. The man he had trusted for so long was now confessing his betrayal, not out of regret, but out of a twisted sense of justification. "You really thought you could get away with this?" Samuel asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. "You thought I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't find out?" David stepped forward, his eyes wild. "You don't know what it's like," he hissed. "You don't know what it's like to watch everything you've worked for crumble while you sit at the top, pretending like everything is fine. I was trying to save this company from your mistakes." The room was silent, the weight of David's words hanging in the air. Samuel didn't know how to respond. Everything he had built, everything he had fought for, was now tainted by betrayal. "I never thought it would come to this," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "But now I see the truth. And I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." David's face twisted in fury, but he knew it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no coming back from it. Samuel stood in front of David, his mind still processing the shock of the revelation. His trusted CFO, the man who had been by his side for years, had orchestrated the attempt on his life. But now, standing in the silence of the study, Samuel realized that this betrayal was only the tip of the iceberg. David's confession, filled with resentment and justification, hung in the air, and Samuel could feel the weight of it crushing him. He had built this empire on trust, and now he was forced to face the painful truth. The very foundation of everything he had worked for had been shattered. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional. It wasn't just about the poison. It was about the decades of deception, the manipulation that had been carefully hidden beneath the surface. But Samuel wasn't one to back down. He had built this empire with his own hands, and he wouldn't let it crumble because of one man's greed. His eyes narrowed as he looked at David, who was now standing there, breathing heavily, his face twisted in anger and guilt. "You think you can just get away with this?" Samuel's voice was cold, his words deliberate. "You think you can betray me, and I'll just let it slide?" David's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and defiance. "You don't understand," he hissed. "This company is falling apart. You've become weak, and I was doing what needed to be done." Samuel's fists clenched at his sides. "No, David. You were doing what you wanted. You were trying to take everything for yourself. You thought you could control it all, but you didn't count on me." The silence between them was heavy, the tension thickening with each passing second. David stepped back, his face paling. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice trembling. Samuel stood tall, unwavering. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows who you really are. You've been living in my shadow for too long, and now it's over. I'll make sure you never see the inside of this office again." David's face contorted with rage, but there was no more confidence in his eyes. He knew it was over. His betrayal had been exposed, and there was no turning back. But as Samuel spoke, his thoughts drifted back to Lily, the young girl who had saved his life, not once, but twice. She had seen through the lies when no one else could, and now Samuel realized that she was the one who had given him the clarity he needed. He couldn't afford to be blinded by power or trust anymore. He needed to act quickly and decisively. "Lily," Samuel said, his tone softer but filled with gratitude, "I owe you everything. You're the only one who hasn't failed me." Lily met his gaze, her eyes calm and steady. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "You saw the truth." Samuel nodded, but the weight of the situation still hung heavily on him. "But now what?" he asked. "What happens next?" Lily took a deep breath before answering. "You start over. You rebuild. And this time, you build on honesty, on trust that's earned, not given." Samuel's heart swelled with a strange mix of relief and determination. He had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at redemption. "I will," he said, his voice strong. "This empire, it's not just mine. It belongs to everyone who believes in it. And I won't let anyone destroy it again." As he turned back to face David, who now stood in stunned silence, Samuel realized that his journey had just begun. The battle was far from over, but with Lily by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. He would rebuild, stronger than before, and this time, he would never allow himself to be blinded by trust again. As days turned into weeks, Samuel McCarthy's world began to shift in ways he could never have predicted. The fallout from David's betrayal had rippled through every corner of his empire, but it was not the collapse he feared. It was the opportunity to rebuild. For the first time in years, Samuel felt like he was in control again, not because of the wealth he commanded, but because he was making decisions rooted in truth, not in the illusions he had built around him. The morning after the meeting with David, Samuel called a board meeting. The room was filled with faces he knew well, some of which now carried a hint of caution, others that seemed genuinely relieved that the dark cloud of betrayal had been lifted. As they all gathered around the polished oak table, Samuel stood at the head, his presence commanding, but his mind was clearer than it had been in a long time. "We've all seen the damage that trust can cause when it's misplaced," Samuel began, his voice calm but firm. "But now, we have the chance to rebuild this company, and we will do it together. I'm not asking for loyalty without question. I'm asking for honesty, for transparency, and for the commitment to do what is right, not what is easy." The room was silent as his words sank in. Samuel had learned the hard way that loyalty without transparency could lead to destruction, and he wasn't willing to let his empire fall again. He looked around at the faces of those who had been by his side for years. "I want to make one thing clear," Samuel continued, his gaze steady. "There are no more secrets. If we are going to move forward, we do it with complete honesty. The tension that had lingered in the air for months seemed to dissolve, replaced by a newfound determination. Samuel knew that rebuilding would take time, but he was willing to put in the work. As the meeting continued, Samuel's thoughts kept drifting back to Lily. She had seen through the facade when no one else could. She had saved his life, not just once, but twice. The realization hit him harder than he expected. This young girl, the daughter of his housekeeper, was more than just a bystander in his world. She was the person who had shown him the truth, who had helped him see the cracks in the foundation before they could destroy everything he had built. Samuel made a decision that day. He wouldn't just rebuild his company. He would make sure that Lily had a place at the table. He called her into his office later that afternoon. She walked in with her usual quiet grace, her eyes full of understanding, as if she already knew what he was about to say. "Lily," Samuel began, his voice softer now, "I don't think I can ever fully repay you for what you've done for me. But I can give you something, an opportunity. I want you to be part of this company, to help rebuild it, to help me make the decisions that matter." Lily looked at him, her expression calm but thoughtful. "I don't need anything from you," she said, her voice steady. "I just want to make sure that the people who work for you are treated with the respect they deserve. I want to make sure that no one else has to feel invisible the way I did." Samuel's heart swelled with pride. This young girl, who had once been invisible to the world around her, was now standing at the forefront of something far bigger than herself. "Then let's do that," he said, his voice full of conviction. "Let's build something that everyone can be proud of. Together." As the days went by, Samuel worked tirelessly to rebuild the company. He made changes, big and small, ensuring that transparency and honesty were at the core of every decision. The employees, once wary and distrustful, began to believe in the new direction the company was taking. But it wasn't just the business that Samuel was rebuilding. It was his life, his legacy. With Lily by his side, he was learning what it meant to truly trust again, to lead not with fear, but with integrity. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Samuel McCarthy felt like he was on the right path. He had been given a second chance, and he was determined to make the most of it. And as he looked at Lily, standing beside him with quiet strength, he knew that this time, they would build something that would last, not just for him, but for everyone who had been part of this journey. As weeks turned into months, Samuel McCarthy's empire began to transform. The once turbulent company, plagued by betrayal and dishonesty, was now a beacon of transparency and integrity. The foundation had been rebuilt, stronger than ever, but it wasn't just the financial growth or corporate success that gave Samuel the most pride. It was the culture that had evolved within the company. He had learned a powerful lesson. True leadership wasn't about control or power. It was about trust and respect. As the months passed, the employees who had once whispered behind his back now spoke openly, sharing their ideas and concerns without fear of retribution. They felt valued, listened to, and for the first time in years, they believed in the future of the company. Samuel's decision to bring Lily into the fold had been a turning point. Her insight, her wisdom, and her unwavering commitment to doing what was right had shown him that leadership wasn't just about being at the top. It was about lifting others up. Lily's presence in the company had a profound impact, not just on Samuel, but on everyone who worked there. She had a way of seeing the truth that others missed, and her voice had become a guiding force in the decision-making process. Samuel had never expected that a simple act of kindness, a warning from a young girl, would change the course of his life. She had seen something in him that he hadn't seen in himself, the potential to be a better leader. And now, with her help, he was becoming the kind of man who led by example, who earned trust instead of demanding it. One evening, as Samuel and Lily stood by the window of his office overlooking the city skyline, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had lost so much, but in the process, he had gained something far more valuable. He had gained clarity, understanding, and most importantly, the kind of relationships that could stand the test of time. "We've come a long way," Samuel said, his voice filled with reflection. Lily, standing beside him, nodded. "Yes, we have. But this is just the beginning." Samuel smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he no longer feared it. He knew that with Lily by his side and the lessons he had learned, he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The empire he had built wasn't just his. It belonged to everyone who had helped him build it from the ground up. And as he looked at Lily, he realized that the future was brighter than ever, not because of the wealth or the power, but because of the trust and respect that now defined his legacy. Together, they had rebuilt more than just a company. They had rebuilt a future. And with that future came endless possibilities. Samuel knew that as long as he stayed true to the lessons he had learned, there was nothing that could stand in his way. His empire had been tested, torn apart, and rebuilt, but it was stronger now, not because of its wealth or resources, but because it was built on the one thing that truly mattered: integrity. In this captivating tale of betrayal and redemption, we follow the journey of a billionaire who faces the ultimate test of trust and survival. Samuel McCarthy, a powerful and wealthy man, finds himself betrayed by someone he trusted the most, his loyal CFO. This millionaire story unfolds with a shocking twist as the young daughter of his housekeeper, Lily, uncovers the truth and saves Samuel's life not once, but twice. As Samuel grapples with the aftermath of the betrayal, he learns valuable lessons about leadership, integrity, and trust. With Lily's help, Samuel rebuilds his empire from the ground up, learning that true power lies not in wealth or control, but in honesty and transparency. This story of a billionaire's rise from betrayal to redemption is one of the most powerful millionaire stories you'll ever hear, showing how even in the face of danger, the truth has the power to change everything. As Samuel rebuilds his empire, he discovers that trust is the foundation of success, and with Lily by his side, he faces a future filled with endless possibilities. This is a millionaire story about overcoming obstacles, rebuilding what was lost, and discovering the true meaning of leadership and success. The twists and turns of this narrative will keep you hooked, showing how one person's betrayal can lead to the greatest transformation in a billionaire's life. If you love millionaire stories with a twist, this one will not disappoint. Samuel's journey proves that no matter how powerful you are, the most valuable asset you have is the trust of those around you. And when that trust is broken, the only way to rebuild is with integrity and honesty.